The unexpected fine. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet. The air was thick with tension, as if something big was about to happen. People shifted in their seats, their eyes fixed on the front of the room, where the judge sat, looking over his papers. It wasn't just any day of the courthouse. There was something different about today's case, something no one in the room could have expected. At the center of all the attention stood a woman, a little nervous but not entirely intimidated. She was young, dressed professionally, with a calm but firm look on her face. She stood straight, hands clasped together, waiting for the judge to speak. Her name was Alina, and today she was facing the judge for something that seemed unbelievable. The judge, an older man with sharp features and glasses, peered down at his paperwork. His eyes moved from the papers to Alina, then back again. The room seemed to hold its breath as the judge read the charges out loud. "Miss Alina Harris," the judge began in a stern voice, "you stand accused of illegal practices, conspiracy, and misconduct in a business transaction." The words hit Alina like a punch to the gut. The accusation felt like a weight pressing on her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, but she stayed composed, knowing she had to keep herself together. This wasn't the first time she had faced a courtroom, but this case was different. And today, she wasn't just a lawyer, she was the accused. As the judge read the charges, a sense of disbelief filled the room. Why was she here? What had she done? Alina had always been known for her professionalism, her dedication to the law, and her integrity. The people in the courtroom were struggling to understand how she ended up in this position. But as the judge spoke, their eyes shifted, sensing something was wrong. Was this really just a simple misunderstanding? "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the judge asked, his voice deep and serious. His eyes narrowed as he waited for her response. Alina took a deep breath. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, ever since she was called to represent a client in a case that was more complicated than anyone had anticipated. But she never imagined it would end up here, in front of the very judge who had called her into court today. Alina opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out as easily as she expected. For a moment, she felt like the whole room was watching her, waiting for her to fall apart. But she didn't. She was determined to fight this, to clear her name. Slowly, she spoke. "I didn't do what I'm being accused of," she said quietly, but firmly. "I am not guilty of these charges. There has been a mistake." The judge's eyes softened just for a moment, as if considering her words, but then his expression hardened again. "Mistake," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "It's a serious matter, Miss Harris. The evidence against you is clear. Your actions have caused harm to the community, and there's no room for mistakes in this court." His voice was loud now, echoing through the silent room. Alina could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't know what to say. What was she supposed to do when the very man who was supposed to judge her fairly was so sure of her guilt? But she wasn't about to give up. She had come too far to back down now. The judge paused for a moment, flipping through the pages of his file. Alina could feel the tension building, the uncertainty in the air growing thicker with every passing second. He cleared his throat and looked at her again, this time more closely. "You are hereby fined," he said, his voice loud and firm. "A sum of $50,000 for your involvement in this case." The words hit Alina like a punch. $50,000. It was an amount she couldn't even dream of paying. Her mind raced. How was she going to handle this? How could she come up with that kind of money? The weight of the fine seemed impossible to bear, but it was nothing compared to the shock she felt. A fine. So suddenly, without a chance to explain or prove her innocence. She stood there, stunned, unable to speak for a moment. Her heart pounded in her chest as the judge continued speaking, giving the court's orders. But her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't focus on anything else. The fine, the charges, it all felt like a nightmare. But just when Alina thought she might break, when she felt the pressure of the situation pushing her to the edge, something strange happened. The judge paused and glanced at her more closely, as if something about her had caught his attention. It was only for a brief moment, but the look on his face was enough to make Alina wonder. Had he seen something in her, or was it just her imagination? The judge then looked down at the paper in his hand, his expression changing. He seemed confused, like he wasn't sure of something. Alina noticed his hands trembling slightly. It was subtle, but it was there. Why was he reacting this way? Why did it feel like something was wrong? The room was completely silent now, and Alina could sense the change in the atmosphere. She wasn't the only one who noticed. The audience in the courtroom, the people who had been so quick to judge her, were starting to wonder. Was the judge making a mistake? Was there something he wasn't telling them? The moment stretched on, dragging everyone in the room deeper into the mystery. Alina's mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening. What was the judge seeing that she didn't know? What was going to happen next? The tension in the air was thick, and the story was only just beginning. Who is this woman? The room was thick with confusion. Alina stood motionless, her mind racing. The judge's unexpected pause had created a moment of uncertainty that seemed to stretch on forever. What had just happened? Why was the judge suddenly acting so strangely? She couldn't help but feel that something was wrong, something deeper than just the charges she was facing. The judge glanced again at the paper in front of him, his fingers brushing over the words as if looking for something he couldn't quite find. He looked at Alina with a mix of surprise and recognition. For a split second, his stern, angry face seemed to soften. Was he starting to doubt the charges, or was he remembering something about her? Alina couldn't tell, but she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. It was unnerving, like the judge was trying to place her, trying to figure out who she was beyond just the woman in front of him in a courtroom. The air in the courtroom felt even heavier now. The usual hum of whispers, the shuffle of papers, and the tapping of pens had all stopped. The audience had sensed something change, something unspoken that had slipped into the room. Everyone was waiting for the judge to speak again. But he didn't. He just kept staring at Alina, his mind clearly working, but his face giving nothing away. She stood there, trying to stay composed, but inside, she was starting to feel uneasy. Alina had been a lawyer for years, a respected one. She had worked with clients in the most complicated cases, fought hard battles, and never backed down. But today, in front of this judge, she felt like a stranger in her own life. Who was this man? What did he know about her? Why was he reacting this way? The tension was unbearable. Alina took a deep breath and tried to steady her thoughts. She couldn't afford to lose control now, not when everything was on the line. Her future, her reputation, everything she had worked for was hanging in the balance. And this judge was the one holding the power to determine it all. The judge finally lowered his paper and gave Alina another long, penetrating look. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time. His gaze shifted from her face to her hands, which were still clasped together tightly. He studied her carefully, as though searching for something. Alina felt a flicker of unease. What was he looking for? What did he think he saw? His lips parted slightly as if he was about to say something, but then he hesitated. The judge turned his eyes back to the rest of the courtroom, clearing his throat. I think there's been some confusion here," he muttered, his voice quieter than before. Confusion. Alina's heart skipped a beat. Had he started to realize the mistake? Could he see the truth? The room was dead silent, all eyes on the judge as he shuffled his papers, glancing over them one more time. Alina's mind was spinning. What was he about to say? "I'm sorry, Miss Harris," the judge continued, his tone softer now, but still firm. "I don't fully understand this situation yet, but—" He trailed off again, glancing back at Alina. "You're not who I thought you were." Alina's stomach twisted. Not who he thought she was. What did he mean? She could feel all eyes in the room on her now. It was as if they were all holding their breath, waiting for the judge to explain himself. But for some reason, he wasn't saying much. The room was completely still, filled only with the sound of the judge turning the pages of his file. Then the judge took a deep breath and finally spoke again. "Miss Harris, is there any reason why you might be familiar to me? You look very familiar." The words hit Elena hard, and her heart skipped a beat. Familiar? Why would the judge think she looked familiar? She had never seen him before in her life. She had never done anything to be connected to this man. She was just here to do her job, representing a client who had been wrongfully accused. The judge's reaction. The door to the courtroom closed behind Elena with a soft click. She stepped into the hallway, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had never felt so unsettled in her life. It wasn't just the fine that shocked her. It wasn't even the unexpected turn of events. No, it was the judge's strange reaction that gnawed at her. His words, "You look very familiar," echoed in her mind like an unanswered question. Elena leaned against the wall, trying to calm her breath. She could hear footsteps approaching behind her, and a moment later, the court bailiff appeared, his face unreadable. "The judge wants you to wait in his chambers," he said, his voice low. "He'll see you in a moment." Elena nodded, her mind still racing. What could the judge possibly want now? Had he changed his mind about the fine? Was he reconsidering the charges, or was he just trying to delay the inevitable? Whatever it was, Elena had no choice but to wait. The bailiff led her down a narrow hallway to a door marked Judge's Chambers. He knocked gently before opening it. The room was small but well appointed, with dark wood paneling and a large desk in the center. The judge was sitting behind the desk, his elbows resting on the surface as he stared at the papers in front of him. His usual stern demeanor was gone. Instead, he appeared lost in thought, his brow furrowed as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. As Elena stepped into the room, the judge looked up, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an uncomfortable silence between them, the tension thick enough to cut through. Elena could see that he was still processing something, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had never seen him like this before. Not the man who had just handed down the fine, but the man sitting before her now, unsure and hesitant. "Please, sit down," the judge said, his voice calmer than before. He gestured to the chair across from him. Elena hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her heart beating faster with each passing second. What was going on? Why was the judge acting like this? He cleared his throat, his eyes not meeting hers. "I need to ask you something, Miss Harris," he began, his voice more measured now. "Are you connected to someone I know?" Elena froze. This was the moment she had feared. Was he finally recognizing her for who she truly was? Was this how it was going to play out? Was this why he'd acted so strangely? She nodded slowly, trying to remain calm, even though her pulse was racing. "I'm not sure what you mean, Your Honor," she replied cautiously, watching him closely. "I don't think we've met before. I've never been in front of you in a case like this." The judge's eyes finally met hers, and for a split second, there was something there, something she couldn't quite place. He was looking at her differently now, his gaze more intense, more focused. "I see," he said softly. "Then why do you seem so familiar to me?" "I've been thinking about it, and I just can't figure it out." Elena leaned forward slightly. "I'm just a lawyer, Your Honor. I've been representing my client in a business case. Perhaps you've seen me around in the legal community." The judge shook his head slowly. "No, it's not that. I've seen you somewhere before, and it's not in the courtroom." His voice was filled with uncertainty now, as though he were speaking his thoughts out loud without fully understanding them. "I've been thinking about it, and I can't get it out of my head. It's driving me crazy." Elena's heart raced. She was certain now. The judge had seen her before, but not in a way she had expected. She had a sudden flash of realization. Could it be that the judge knew someone close to her, someone she had never thought to connect with him? Elena stayed quiet, letting the judge process his thoughts. She wasn't sure what to say. She didn't want to reveal too much. There was something about the way he was acting now that made her nervous. Something told her this wasn't just about the fine or the case anymore. It was about something personal, something bigger. Finally, the judge's expression shifted. "I think I understand now," he said, almost as if speaking to himself. He leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. "This is going to sound strange, Miss Harris, but you remind me of someone very close to me. Someone I care about." Alina's breath caught in her throat. Her instincts told her not to say anything, to stay quiet and let the judge continue. She knew that whatever he was about to say would change everything. The judge's voice dropped even lower, as if he were struggling to find the right words. "You see, my son, he's involved in a case, and the lawyer representing him, she looks just like you." Alina's mind raced. Her stomach twisted with a mixture of confusion and surprise. Could it be? Was the judge talking about her? Did he somehow know about her connection to his son? She forced herself to speak, even though her voice felt like it was coming from someone else. "Your son?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge nodded slowly. "Yes, my son. He's been facing some legal issues, and the lawyer representing him. I can't believe it. The resemblance is uncanny. You two look almost identical." Alina sat there, her mind reeling. She had known that she was representing someone in a high-profile case, but she never imagined it would be connected to the judge sitting across from her. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but she couldn't believe what she was hearing. How had the judge not known? How could he not have recognized her from the start? As the silence grew between them, Alina finally realized the full extent of the situation. This wasn't just about the fine anymore. This was something much bigger, something personal that could change everything. And yet, Alina had one final question burning in her mind. How would the judge react now that he knew the truth? For a split second, she felt a cold chill run down her spine. Could the judge know something about her that she didn't? Had he somehow recognized her? Alina took a breath, trying to remain calm. There was no way he could know her personally. She had kept her work and personal life separate for years. But then, Alina's eyes widened slightly. A realization struck her. Could it be possible that the judge didn't recognize her for who she was, but for who she was connected to? Could it be that the judge knew someone close to her, someone important? A flicker of doubt crossed her mind. What if the judge had seen her before, only not in a courtroom? What if there was something more going on here, something beyond the case they were discussing? Alina felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place, but they didn't quite line up. There was something bigger at play here, something she couldn't yet understand. The judge shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk in front of him. He let out a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry, Miss Harris, but I'll have to take a recess," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. "Please, wait outside. I need to clear my mind." Alina didn't move at first. Her body was frozen in place, her mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. The judge seemed so certain at first, so sure of her guilt, but now he was questioning everything. What had made him change his mind? As the court bailiff signaled for her to leave the room, Alina stood slowly, her heart still pounding. She tried to ignore the whispers from the people around her, the curious glances, and the subtle hum of uncertainty in the air. There was no going back now. Something was happening, and she could feel it in her gut. Something was about to unfold, something that could change everything. As Alina walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the judge's words echoed in her mind. "You look very familiar." But familiar from where? And why did that comment feel so unsettling? The judge's eyes were fixed on her now, searching her face for any sign of recognition. Alina remained silent, letting the moment stretch on, unsure of what to say. Her mind was racing, and the pieces were slowly falling into place. She had been hired to represent a client, but what she hadn't realized was that her client was somehow connected to the judge in a way she never could have imagined. After what felt like an eternity, Alina finally spoke. "Your son, Is he the one involved in the case I'm handling? Her voice trembled, despite her best efforts to sound composed. The judge's eyes flickered with surprise, as though he hadn't expected her to make that connection. Yes, the judge said, his voice quieter now. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. My son, Aaron. He's been facing serious legal trouble, and the lawyer handling his case, well, I don't know what to think anymore. I never expected this. He paused, as though searching for the right words. This is all so complicated. It doesn't make sense. Alina swallowed hard. Everything was starting to click into place, but the more she understood, the more questions it raised. The case she was representing had seemed straightforward at first, nothing she couldn't handle. But now, with the judge's connection to her client's case, Alina realized just how much was at stake. This wasn't just about legal procedures anymore. It was personal, and the judge had no idea how deep the ties went. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, and for a moment, she considered telling him the truth, but something held her back. She couldn't reveal too much. Not yet. The ramifications of everything she knew could change everything, not just for her, but for the judge, for Aaron, and for the entire case. The judge's eyes softened, a faint trace of guilt crossing his features. Miss Harris, I have to admit, I didn't know who you were when I first saw you in the courtroom today. I didn't know you were the lawyer representing Aaron. I only recognized the resemblance after I saw you standing there. I know my son's lawyer well. We've been through a lot together. I just didn't expect. He trailed off, shaking his head as though trying to clear his thoughts. This is so much more than I can handle. Alina remained still, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as she struggled to keep her composure. She had a million thoughts running through her head. She needed to understand why the judge was so shaken up. What had he been expecting when he walked into the courtroom today? What had he known about her client? And why hadn't he connected the dots earlier? The judge continued, his voice growing more conflicted. I don't want to believe this, Miss Harris. I don't want to believe that my son could be mixed up in something like this. But the evidence is there, and I can't ignore it. And now, knowing that you're the one representing him, I don't know what to think. This is tearing me apart. Alina's mind was spinning. She had always believed in the law, in fairness, and in truth. But now, sitting across from the judge, the man who held so much power over her future, she realized that the lines between right and wrong weren't as clear as she had once thought. There were so many layers to this case, so many hidden truths that no one seemed to fully understand. I never wanted to be in this position, Alina finally said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. I'm just here to do my job. I didn't come into this case knowing who your son was, and I certainly didn't expect to be sitting here, facing you, after everything that's happened. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting the judge's. I'm doing everything I can to help my client. But I can't ignore the fact that this is much more complicated than anyone realizes. The judge's face hardened, but there was a flicker of something else behind his eyes. Doubt, fear, maybe even regret. I understand that, he said quietly. But what about the fine, Miss Harris? What about what I've already done? What happens next? The question hung in the air. Alina could feel the weight of it bearing down on her. She knew that the fine, the accusations, and everything that had led them to this point were just the beginning of a much larger story, one that neither she nor the judge could control. The silence between them grew thick again, but this time it was different. There was a sense of urgency in the air, as if both of them knew that the truth was out there, just waiting to be uncovered. Alina had no idea where it would lead, but she couldn't back down now. The stakes had just become much higher than she had ever imagined. The judge's voice broke the silence again, quieter this time. I have to ask you, Miss Harris, what exactly do you know about Aaron's case? Is there something I should know that I don't? Something that might change everything. Alina's mind raced. Should she tell him? Could she? There was so much at stake, and revealing the truth now might change everything for both of them. But before she could answer, there was a sudden knock at the door. The bailiff entered, looking at the judge with a somber expression. "Your Honor, there's a development in the case, something you need to see." The judge's eyes shifted toward the bailiff, his expression hardening once more. "What is it?" The bailiff stepped forward, handing the judge a stack of papers. It's regarding Aaron Harris. It's not what we expected." Alina's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" The judge's eyes scanned the papers, his face pale. Then, without a word, he looked up at Alina, his expression a mix of shock and realization. "This changes everything." And with that, Alina knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shocking revelation. The room felt like it was closing in on Alina as the judge stared at the papers in front of him. His fingers gripped the stack of documents so tightly that his knuckles were white, his face pale as he processed the information. Alina watched him closely, her heart pounding in her chest. She had thought she knew where things were heading, but now, with the judge's stunned expression, it was clear that everything was about to take a new and unpredictable turn. For a long moment, the judge didn't speak. The silence in the room was thick, as if the air itself had become dense with the weight of the revelation. Alina's mind raced. What could be in those papers? Had the case taken an unexpected twist? Was there something about Aaron's involvement in the case that no one had anticipated? Finally, the judge looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Miss Harris," he said, his voice shaky, this changes everything." Alina's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The uncertainty in the judge's voice was enough to send a chill down her spine. This wasn't the calm, collected judge he had seen in the courtroom earlier. This was a man who was rattled, who had just discovered something that shook him to his core. The judge cleared his throat, as if trying to steady himself before he spoke again. "This document," he said slowly, "it's a file from an anonymous source. It says that my son, Aaron, he's not just involved in this case. He's been framed. Someone is setting him up. The charges against him, they're not real." Alina's eyes widened in shock. Framed? Was it possible? For a moment, she couldn't fully process what the judge had just said. She had been preparing for the worst. But this was something entirely different. "How is that possible?" Alina managed to ask, her voice shaky as she tried to make sense of the situation. "I've seen the evidence, Your Honor. The charges against him, the accusations, it all seemed so clear." The judge shook his head, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the pages. "I don't know, but this file says otherwise. There's evidence of tampering. Someone has planted false information, trying to make it look like Aaron is guilty of something he didn't do." Alina felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over her. She had been representing a client who she believed to be guilty, but now it seemed like everything she knew was a lie. The pieces of the puzzle she had carefully put together were starting to crumble, and Alina had no idea what to believe anymore. Who would do this? Alina asked, almost to herself, as she tried to wrap her mind around the idea of someone framing Aaron, who had the power to manipulate the legal system in such a way. And why would they go so far to hurt an innocent man? The judge's expression hardened. "I don't know, but I intend to find out. Someone is trying to ruin my son's life, and I won't let that happen." Alina felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been in law long enough to know that things were never as simple as they appeared. This wasn't just about Aaron's innocence. It was about someone powerful, someone with the resources to manipulate the entire case. And now it seemed like she was caught in the middle of it. "I have to speak to Aaron," the judge said, standing up abruptly, his face filled with determination. "I need to know what he knows about all of this. He's the key to understanding what's really going on." Alina nodded, her mind still reeling from the revelation. "I agree. But, Your Honor, there's something else. If Aaron has been framed, there may be others involved. Someone else could be pulling the strings." The judge paused for a moment, considering her words carefully. I know. That's why I need to speak to him immediately. If he's innocent, I will do everything in my power to clear his name. Elena stood up, her thoughts racing. She had never expected to find herself in the middle of such a complex and dangerous situation. The case had gone from a simple legal matter to a fight for justice, and now, with this new information, Elena realized that the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. I'll do whatever it takes to help, Elena said firmly, her voice steady as she made her decision. If Aaron's innocent, I'll help you find the truth. The judge looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and desperation. Thank you, Miss Harris. We're going to need all the help we can get. But just as the judge was about to leave the room, there was another knock at the door. The bailiff entered again, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. Your Honor, the bailiff said, his voice trembling. There's been another development. It's about Aaron. Elena's heart skipped a beat. What is it? She asked urgently, stepping toward the bailiff. The bailiff's voice dropped to a whisper. They've arrested him. They're charging him with a crime he didn't commit, and they're saying he's dangerous. Elena's breath caught in her throat. This was worse than she could have imagined. If they were charging Aaron with something far more serious, then the stakes had just been raised even higher. Someone was trying to destroy him, and they were going to great lengths to make sure he paid for a crime he didn't commit. The judge's face twisted with rage. I knew it, he muttered. This isn't just a case of framing. They're trying to destroy my son. Whoever is behind this, they're going to regret it. Elena's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about saving Aaron anymore. It was about uncovering a conspiracy so vast and dangerous that it could ruin everything. And she was right in the middle of it. As the bailiff left the room, the judge turned to Elena, his eyes filled with determination. We have to act quickly. I'm not letting anyone destroy my son's life. We need to get to the bottom of this. Now. Elena nodded, her heart racing. She had no idea what they were about to face, but one thing was clear. Everything she thought she knew had just changed. The truth was out there. And now it was up to her and the judge to uncover it before it was too late. And as they left the chambers together, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. A much larger story was unfolding, and she was caught in the heart of it. The unseen enemy. Elena felt the weight of the moment as she walked beside the judge down the dimly lit hallway. Everything had shifted so suddenly. What had started as a routine legal case was now spiraling into something far more dangerous, far more complex. She could hardly believe the news that Aaron had been arrested. The authorities were now accusing him of being involved in a much more serious crime, one that could destroy his life, even if he was innocent. And there was a chilling sense that someone powerful, was pulling the strings. She glanced at the judge as they approached the elevator. His face was a mask of fury and determination. She could see that he was trying to remain composed, but the strain was evident. This was personal for him. His son's future was on the line, and the thought of an innocent man being framed, let alone his own flesh and blood, was something that he couldn't ignore. We need to find out who's behind all of this, Elena said, breaking the silence as they stepped into the elevator. If they've gone this far to frame Aaron, they won't stop until they've destroyed him. The judge nodded sharply. I agree. But we have to be careful. Whoever is doing this is highly organized. This isn't just a random act of sabotage. They've planned this out. And now we're in the middle of it. Elena's mind raced as the elevator descended. She was no stranger to high-stakes cases, but this was different. This wasn't just about defending a client. It was about uncovering a conspiracy that reached further than they could imagine. If Aaron was innocent, someone was going to great lengths to make sure he paid the price for something he hadn't done. And now, Elena and the judge were part of a larger game they didn't fully understand. The doors of the elevator opened, and they stepped into the busy courthouse lobby. The judge's footsteps were heavy, and Elena could sense the tension building as they made their way toward the exit. She could feel the eyes of the people around them, and for the first time, she was acutely aware of the danger they were in. They were up against an unseen enemy, one that had been pulling strings from the shadows. As they reached the car, the judge turned to her. "I'll take you to Aaron's detention center. We need to talk to him, and we need to figure out what he knows. We can't waste any more time." Elena nodded. The thought of seeing Aaron in handcuffs was unsettling, but she knew it was necessary. She needed answers. They needed to understand exactly how deep this plot went and how to expose the truth before it was too late. The drive to the detention center was tense. Neither of them spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts. Elena kept thinking about the file the judge had shown her earlier, the one that claimed Aaron had been framed. She couldn't help but wonder, who had sent that file? Why would they want to help Aaron? And more importantly, who would go to such lengths to set him up? When they arrived at the detention center, Elena's heart was pounding. She had seen many clients behind bars, but this felt different. This was Aaron, a man who might be innocent, a man who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were led down a narrow corridor to a small room, where Aaron was sitting at a table, his hands cuffed in front of him. His face was pale, his eyes darkened by exhaustion, but there was something else in his gaze, a hint of fear mixed with a sense of confusion, like he didn't fully understand what was happening. The judge walked up to the table, his expression softening when he saw his son. "Aaron," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "What happened? What do you know about all of this?" Aaron looked up, his face tightening as if the question was too much to bear. "Dad, I swear I didn't do it," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know how this happened. I don't know who's doing this, but I swear I'm being set up." Elena could see the pain in his eyes. She had seen it before, clients who swore they were innocent, but the evidence was stacked against them. Yet there was something in Aaron's voice that struck her. It wasn't the usual desperation she had heard from others. There was a quiet certainty in his words. He believed he was innocent, and for some reason, Elena found herself starting to believe him too. "Tell us everything, Aaron," the judge said, his voice firm but gentle. "We need to know everything that happened leading up to your arrest. If there's even a chance you're being framed, we have to act quickly." Aaron nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. He was clearly trying to gather his thoughts, to make sense of the chaos that had turned his life upside down. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I don't know where to begin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It started with a business deal. I was working with a partner, someone I trusted. But something went wrong, and now, I think they're trying to pin everything on me. The evidence they have against me, it doesn't add up. I've never been involved in anything like this before." Elena leaned forward, listening intently. "Who is your partner, Aaron? Do you know who might be behind this?" Aaron shook his head. "I don't know who to trust anymore. The person I was working with, he disappeared. No one can find him. But I think someone's been watching me, pulling the strings. I've been getting strange calls, and people I'd never seen before have been following me. I didn't think it was serious at first, but now I realize I was being set up." Elena exchanged a glance with the judge. This was it. This was the piece they had been waiting for. Someone had been orchestrating the entire thing from the shadows. And now it was clear that they had targeted Aaron, and perhaps even the judge himself. The judge's face darkened with concern. "Whoever is behind this has been careful. They've made sure to cover their tracks. But we'll find them, Aaron. We'll find out who's doing this and stop them before it's too late." Elena nodded. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a race against time. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but there were still so many unknowns. The question was, who was behind all of this, and why? And as the door to the room closed behind them, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, one they had no choice but to face head-on. The shocking truth. Alina's heart raced as she followed the judge down the narrow hallway toward the detention room. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. They had entered a case thinking it was just about legal wrangling, but now it had evolved into a dangerous web of deceit and conspiracy. As much as Alina wanted to believe Aaron was innocent, the stakes had grown higher with every passing moment. She had to be careful. They all did. The door to the small room creaked as they entered. Aaron sat slumped in the chair, his hands cuffed in front of him, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. He didn't look like the man accused of such serious crimes. He looked like someone who had been wronged, someone who was desperately trying to make sense of an impossible situation. His gaze shifted between Alina and the judge, his father, but there was no joy in the reunion, only confusion and fear. The judge's voice was soft yet firm. "Aaron, son, you have to tell us everything. Whatever you know, whatever has happened, we need to hear it. We're going to clear your name, but you have to help us understand how we got here." Aaron swallowed hard and nodded. His lips trembled, but he steadied himself before speaking, as if he had been rehearsing his words in his mind for hours. "I don't know how it all turned out this way, Dad. I swear. I didn't do anything wrong." Alina watched carefully, taking in every word, every movement. Something about Aaron's tone seemed genuine. He wasn't just another man caught in a legal mess trying to wiggle out of it. He looked like a man who had been blindsided, just as she had been. He was trapped in a nightmare of someone else's making. "It's not making sense," Aaron continued, his voice rising with frustration. "Everything that's happening, all the evidence, it's all wrong. I've been set up, and I don't know by who, but someone's got to be pulling the strings." The judge's brow furrowed. "Who, Aaron? Who would want to do this to you? You've always kept your head down, worked hard. Who would go this far to frame you?" Aaron took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room as though the walls themselves might hold the answers. "I've been getting strange calls. People I don't recognize following me. It started small, things I thought were just coincidences, but then it escalated. A few weeks ago, I started getting these threats. Anonymous emails, people calling me at odd hours, warning me to stay quiet. I didn't know what they wanted, but I ignored it. Until now." Alina could feel the weight of his words. This wasn't just a random mistake or a misunderstanding. Someone was out to ruin him. And from the looks of it, that someone had been planning this for a long time. "Wait," Alina said, leaning forward. "Who are these people? Who's behind it?" Aaron's face turned even paler, his hands trembling slightly. "I wish I knew. I don't know who's after me. But I know this isn't the first time someone's been targeted like this. There's something bigger going on, something I've stumbled into. And now, it's too late. They're going to make sure I'm guilty, no matter what. They've planted evidence, twisted the truth. It's all set up to make it look like I'm guilty." Alina exchanged a glance with the judge. This was far worse than they had anticipated. This wasn't just about clearing Aaron's name. This was a fight against something far more sinister, a conspiracy to make someone pay for a crime they didn't commit. The implications were staggering. "Someone wants to ruin your life, Aaron," the judge said softly. "And they're willing to go to any lengths to do it. But we won't let them win. We'll find the truth, no matter what." Aaron looked up at his father, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and despair. "You're going to help me. You believe me." The judge's voice was steady, unwavering. "I've always believed in you, son. And now, more than ever, we have to work together to uncover who's behind this." Alina took a deep breath, trying to steady her own nerves. This case had just gone from a legal battle to a fight for survival. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just targeting Aaron. They were targeting the judge too, and possibly everyone around them. They had to be careful. Their every move was now under scrutiny. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Alina said, her voice firm. "But it's not going to be easy. Whoever is pulling the strings knows how to cover their tracks. We need to find out who's orchestrating this before it's too late." As they stood there, ready to leave, the door to the room suddenly opened. The bailiff stepped inside, his face pale and his eyes wide with anxiety. "Your Honor," the bailiff said, voice shaky, "there's been another development. It's about the case." The judge's expression darkened. "What now?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. The bailiff hesitated before speaking again. "I don't know how to say this, but there's evidence, new evidence that links Aaron directly to a crime scene. It's all over the news. They're saying it's irrefutable." Aaron's face fell as the room grew heavier with tension. Alina felt the knot tighten in her stomach. If they thought the evidence had already been fabricated before, this would be their final blow. Someone was controlling the narrative, shaping the story in ways they couldn't predict. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let Aaron off the hook. Not now. Not ever. The judge's jaw clenched as he turned to Alina. "We have to stop this now. We can't wait any longer." Alina nodded, her mind spinning. If the evidence was out there, if the media had already caught hold of the story, they were up against something far bigger than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just a case anymore. This was a battle for Aaron's freedom, and perhaps his life. And with every passing moment, they were losing ground. The judge's next words came like a cold, hard command. "We're going to have to go to extreme lengths to uncover the truth. Whatever it takes. We're in too deep to back out now." As Alina stepped out of the room, the weight of their situation hit her full force. This was no longer just a case of a man's innocence. It was a fight against a shadowy enemy that seemed determined to destroy everyone who got in their way. They were running out of time, and soon they would be forced to make choices that could change their lives forever. The truth was out there, hidden in the dark corners of this case, and Alina was determined to find it before it was too late. The final confrontation. The air felt thick with tension as Alina and the judge stepped out of the detention center. Each moment that passed felt heavier, as if the walls around them were closing in. Aaron's fate hung in the balance, and they were no closer to finding out who was behind the plot to ruin him. But one thing was clear. Whoever was orchestrating this was prepared to stop at nothing to make sure their plan succeeded. "We're running out of time," Alina said, her voice tight with frustration as they entered the judge's car. "Every move we make seems to be countered by someone who's always one step ahead. They've planted the evidence, they've twisted the story, and now they've even involved the media." The judge's jaw clenched as he gripped the steering wheel. "I know, but we can't back down now. We've come too far. If there's one thing I've learned in my years as a judge, it's that truth has a way of coming to light. We just have to make sure we're the ones who uncover it before they bury it for good." Alina nodded, her mind spinning. The stakes had never been higher. She had seen a lot in her career, but this case was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Whoever was behind the frame-up wasn't just using the law. They were manipulating the system, pulling strings in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. And Aaron, caught in the middle of it all, was paying the price for their actions. As they arrived at the judge's office, Alina felt a surge of urgency. "We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to do it quickly. If someone's orchestrating all this, they won't stop until Aaron's locked away for good. We need to get ahead of them." The judge agreed, and they began reviewing all the evidence they had gathered so far. The judge's office, usually a place of order and structure, now felt like the headquarters of a mission to uncover a vast conspiracy. Files were strewn across the desk, computers hummed with information, and a deep sense of determination filled the air. But as they pored over the case, something caught Alina's eye, something she hadn't seen before. A name, buried in the middle of one of the files, stood out. It was the name of someone the judge knew well, a prominent lawyer who had always kept a low profile. A lawyer who, until now, had never been suspected of anything underhanded. But now, Alina had a sinking feeling in her stomach. This was the person pulling the strings. "Alina, what's wrong?" the judge asked, Noticing her sudden stillness, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she traced the name with her finger. "This is it. I think I've found our link." The judge stepped closer, frowning. "What do you mean?" Alina's voice dropped to a whisper. "This lawyer. He's connected to too many pieces of the puzzle. He's involved in the cases that seem to have influenced this one. The clients he's represented, they all seem to have something in common. And now, with this case, he's at the center of it all. Whoever's been orchestrating Aaron's downfall, this is the person who's been behind it." The judge's eyes widened as realization dawned on him. "You're saying he's been manipulating the entire case. But why? What's his motive?" Alina bit her lip, thinking it through. "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling he's trying to cover something up. Maybe he's been involved in something illegal for a long time, and he's using Aaron as a scapegoat. Or maybe he has a personal vendetta against the judge's family." The pieces were slowly falling into place, but there was one thing Alina knew for sure. They had to confront this lawyer, and they had to do it quickly. The clock was ticking, and they needed answers before things escalated any further. "Let's go," the judge said, his voice steady despite the urgency in the air. "We need to confront him now." The drive to the lawyer's office was quiet, but Alina's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation could be their last chance. If they were wrong, it would all fall apart. But if they were right, it would bring everything into the light. As they arrived at the lawyer's office, the atmosphere shifted. It was an imposing building, sleek and professional, a symbol of the power and influence the lawyer held. But Alina wasn't intimidated. She had seen this kind of power before, and it was about to be shattered. They walked into the office with purpose, and as the receptionist looked up, Alina could see the nervousness in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to speak with Mr. Turner," the judge said, his voice calm but commanding. "Immediately." The receptionist hesitated but then nodded, picking up the phone. A few moments later, the door to the back office opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped into the room. It was the lawyer, Mr. Turner. His gaze flickered between the judge and Alina, a smile slowly curling on his lips. "Well, well," Mr. Turner said, his tone smooth and confident. "It's not often I get a visit from a judge and his lawyer. What can I do for you today?" The judge's eyes hardened. "We know what you've been doing, Turner. We know you've been behind the scheme to frame my son. And we know you've been pulling the strings this whole time." For a brief moment, Mr. Turner's smile faltered, but it quickly returned. "You're mistaken, Judge. There's no conspiracy here. I'm just doing my job, representing clients. Nothing more, nothing less." Alina stepped forward, her voice firm. "We've seen the evidence, Turner. The documents, the phone records, everything points to you. You've been orchestrating this case from the beginning, setting Aaron up to take the fall for a crime he didn't commit." Mr. Turner's expression darkened. "You think you've got everything figured out, don't you? Well, you're wrong. You don't know anything. And you're too late to stop what's already in motion." Alina's blood ran cold as she realized the gravity of his words. "What do you mean? What have you done?" Mr. Turner leaned forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're standing in the middle of a game you'll never win. You think you can expose me. I've already covered my tracks. There's nothing you can do to stop it now." The tension in the room was palpable as Alina's mind raced. They had come for answers, but instead they were staring at the face of a man who had been pulling the strings all along. And now, with every word he spoke, it was clear that the real battle was just beginning. Before Alina could respond, the sound of sirens echoed outside, growing louder with each passing second. The judge turned to her with a look of shock. "He's setting us up." The final confrontation had begun, and it was clear this was a fight for survival, one that would determine not only Aaron's fate, but the future of everyone involved.